Global Conservation Corps presents the Rhino Man Podcast. I'm John Jerko, your host, and one of the directors of Rhino Man the Movie. This podcast series is a way for me to interview top conservationists on the topics of rhinos, the poaching crisis, the importance of rangers, and community engagement, all as a way to create awareness around these issues and to promote the coming release of our documentary film. In this episode, I'm talking with James Slade. James was born in British Columbia, surrounded by wildlife on the Canadian West Coast. After some years of traveling, he ended up studying at the Southern African Wildlife College. From there, he worked as a game ranger and tracker at the Cheetah Conservation Fund. He was a senior warden and operations manager with the International Anti-Poaching Foundation. He worked for the Game Rangers Association of Africa. He was a technical advisor for the Bumi Hills Foundation, and he's currently the Wildlife Crime Prevention Officer for Rewild. On top of that, James is a volunteer firefighter with the Lone Butte Fire Department in BC, Canada. In this conversation, we talk about all of James's roles and experiences through the lens of following his passion for wild spaces and working in the bush, from his early days growing up in BC to his decision to study at the SAWC, and all that he has learned and encountered through his varied positions over the years, from training rangers to combating poaching to understanding crime prevention. This is another great episode full of stories of following one's passion and seeing where it takes them. So without further ado, here's my in-depth conversation with James Slade. All right, James, welcome to the Rhino Man Podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on here.
Thanks, John. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so let's start out with where you are. I feel like you're in a pretty amazing location.
Sure, yeah. I moved back to Canada at the beginning of 2018, and I'm here at home, which is in the Caribou, sort of central part of British Columbia, Canada, in a little town called Lone Butte. So that's where I make my home, and you can see it's not a log cabin. This is my permanent residence.
Yeah, it sounds pretty amazing. I think we chatted with you back in the winter, and you might have turned the computer around or something, and it was just completely snow covered out there. It gets pretty brisk out there, huh?
We get a bit of a range in Celsius. I think the coldest we got last year was minus 41, and the hottest we've had this year is around 40 degrees Celsius. So yeah, you get the full spectrum.
yeah, both ends of it. Talk about what it's like up there, because you grew up in British Columbia, correct?
I did, yeah. I grew up in BC. I was here until I was 18. I grew up in the Lower Mainland, a little town called Squamish, which is not so little anymore.
It's big climbing country there, correct?
Big climbing country, kayaking, fishing, kiteboarding, whatever you sort of want to do. It's sort of like the adventure capital of BC, really. And it's very close to Whistler Blackcomb, which of course is one of the big ski resorts and things. So we had the whole range of whatever you want to do right in your backyard all that time, and you try not to take it for granted when you're a teenager and things, but I think now looking back at the opportunities we had and just the incredible environment to live in and to explore in and everything like that did have a big part in shaping who I am today. So
do you have any memories that really stand out from that time that maybe just hooked you to the outdoors or hooked you to conservation and that side of things?
I think it was everything. I mean, growing up, my family, my dad especially, he's not what you'd call an outdoorsman, but he's someone that spends a huge amount of his time outside. And so it was, growing up in I guess everybody has their own golden era, but looking back, for us, it certainly was where, you'd go outside in the summer or even the winter, and you'd come back when it was dark, and the whole time was exploring the woods, going frogging, whatever you could, it was pretty incredible. We just had a great time as kids and tried to spend as much time outside as possible.
Yeah. I imagine you had some pretty amazing wildlife sightings too. There's grizzlies up in that area, right? 'Cause, I mean, I grew up in Northeast Ohio, and there's not too much that can really get you out there, but it feels a little more wild out where you're at.
There is, and where I grew up is a place called the Garibaldi Highlands, which is in Squamish, but it's sort of up on a mountain outside of the main town. And as a kid, I can remember clearly two incidents. One, when I was very young, there had been a cougar trapped in the garage of a neighbor. And the conservation officers and parks department had to come out and trap it and relocate it and everything. And so that was quite exciting. And as it was, sedated there, they allowed the kids to come not too close, but to see it in the cage before they relocated it and everything. And that was really exciting. And then we used to get, even though it was sort of deemed suburban where I was, it backed on to just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kilometers of forest. And so we used to get everything in the backyard, from raccoons to black bear, especially. The grizzly were a little bit more in upper Squamish, but black bear certainly. And one year we had cubs, and especially one cub right up a tree in the backyard, and the parks department had to come and help it get out of there. And so they actually darted it, and they darted it from the tree and caught it safely as it came down and relocated it there. And I think that was one of the sort of awe-inspiring moments. Like, these are the Canadian Rangers. This is what they're doing. This is part of their job. It seems so cool. And, watching them tag the animal and release it back. And yeah, I mean, surely there's cases of human wildlife conflict, or where we've been expanding too much into the territory of the wildlife. But, generally growing up, everybody just sort of, because they're so outdoors focused, they have this incredible respect and admiration for the natural environment around them. So again, yeah, very, very easy to be shaped into someone who has a lot of appreciation for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm kind of interested in how that contrasted with your experience in Africa, which we'll get to. You've done a lot of traveling around, but I kind of want to go back to what you're doing right now. You said you're volunteering with the local fire department. Why did you decide to do that? What got you into that?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. I mean, after many years of being sort of, in the thick of it. I mean, I spent a little over a decade in Southern Africa, especially in Zimbabwe. And, you were on call all the time, on whether it was on the rhino reserve or when I was working up in Kariba on the elephant poaching. You were on the radio all the time, and it was a 24-hour day kind of job, and, the excitement with that and everything. And I certainly, when moving back to Canada, and even though I do get to go into the field quite a bit now, on a daily basis, I do spend a bit more time behind the computer now, and I'd missed that sort of action. Saying that, at the same time, when I moved up to the Caribou in October of 2020, that next summer of 2021, we just had this incredible breakout of fires here, the wildfires and everything. And they put a call out for people that were interested in joining the Lone Butte Volunteer Fire Department. And I just put my hand up, and it's been an incredible experience. I mean, they put us through all the training. They put us through our first responder course and everything, much of which I'd done, components of in Africa and my role there. And so I thought, yeah, maybe I have something I can contribute here and help out. And it's been an amazing experience. It's really exciting. And you feel like you're able to give back to the community, support here. And it's just a great team of very passionate people that do this as a side job. It's not even a job. They volunteer to do it. And so, yeah, it's very rewarding and refreshing to be able to be on call like that again, and know that you're trying to make a positive impact, however big it is.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I feel like we all live on Zoom these days, and it's great because we can communicate with so many people around the world, but you do kind of miss that immediate feedback of doing something, either in your hometown or with people in person. So yeah, it's pretty cool that you get to do that now. Is it mostly forest fires there, or does it kind of include everything with this fire department, from house fires, things like that?
It's a mix. I mean, the only thing we don't do at this stage is interior. So it's a lot of exterior firefighting. It's everything from motor vehicle incidents to medical calls to structure fires, wildlands fires. Yeah, I mean, I've only been with it for a little over a year now, but it's especially the last couple of weeks has been pretty busy. And you can get paged at any time. You could do an 8-10 hour working day and think you can settle down for some dinner, and then you get paged right out the door. And it's just part of the life now, and it's something that I really feel passionately about, and not just the excitement and adventure of firefighting or anything like that, or getting to ride in the big red truck. It's really that wanting to contribute, as well as channel those energies and those skills that I so incredibly fortunate to develop over those years working in Africa and working as a ranger. It's nice to be able to apply them somewhere else and know that you can give a helping hand.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And I think we need a lot of we're missing a lot of that community aspect of life nowadays too. So that's kind of just another way to, pitch in and help that local community. So, yeah.
Yeah, and not to mention, with the change in climate that we're experiencing, I mean, we're not that much difference from California here all the way up the West Coast. Things are getting hotter and drier, and we're seeing, these pine forests and the impact of the pine beetle and everything that it's having, and just, the ecology is changing and it's getting hotter, and these fires are more and more common. We're getting a lot more dry lightning, which are setting things off. And so you sort of also feel a bit of responsibility that if you have some know-how and have that ability to pitch in, I think it's important that all of us try to make a difference in any way that we can, whether it's areas that need to conserve water or whether it's areas that need to, get active and get fire smart. I think it's going to be really necessary for us all across North America and beyond.
Yeah. Well, let's take a little journey on to how you got some of these skills to begin with. So you grew up in BC, and what took you out of the country? It seemed like you did a little bit of traveling there, eventually ending up in Africa. What was that process like?
Well, yeah. So when I was young, when I was in high school, I certainly wouldn't have been what you would label as a conservationist. I was actually really into music and punk rock especially, and that was life. That was the be all and end all, and going to concerts and things like that. At the same time, finding time to enjoy the outdoors. But I wanted to start a career in audio engineering actually, and look into music recording and stuff. And I think as I got closer and closer to graduation, I realized that I didn't want to just jump from one school to the next. And the idea was to get a little bit of traveling under my belt, because again, being so close with my father and his passion for traveling, I mean, I could do a whole podcast just on his adventures. And so as soon as the opportunity came up, I said, I'm going to take a year out and do some traveling. And so right after graduation, everything I'd saved up, I took off with a friend of mine, and we traveled and ended up traveling around the UK primarily. And as you do when you're still a very young man, you have all these big grand dreams of traveling, but the pubs kind of eat away at that. And so I found myself out of money, but my father is from England originally. And so I had a UK passport. And so I was able to stay there, and I really fell in love with the Highlands of Scotland. And so I ended up living there for about 6 years. And that's, I think, when I really found myself not rudderless, but kind of working to travel. So I would work for 3 or 4 months, save up every penny I could, and just go traveling all around, Europe, and then starting to go into North Africa and East Africa. And it took a few years, but I started to realize that all of those travels, whenever I was planning them and thinking about where next to go, I was really thinking about, well, what wildlife can I see? What national parks can I visit? How can I get behind those barriers that say, staff only in the national parks? Who can I make contacts with? I want to see all of it, And that was really what was sort of driving it. I mean, I was going to Romania, trying to get up into the Carpathians and see how people were trying to conserve some of the bears and wolves there. I was going into, Morocco and Tunisia, and trying to find out about desert conservation programs and things that they were doing there. So yeah, it kind of just clicked after a while that was where my passions were lying. And so I actually started to look into a career in conservation in the UK, and started looking at courses to become a gamekeeper, because that's where my whole life was at that time. But
is that a gamekeeper? Is that more focused on like a zoo or what?
Well, no, it's more focused on the sort of the lands in northern Scotland that, it's more like land preservation. But as I looked more and more into it, it's a lot of like, it's looking after the land, but at the same time, it's a lot of working for rich people as well, helping them with deer hunts and grouse feeding so they can shoot grouse and things. And as the more I looked into it, I thought, this is not me. This is not what I'm looking for. And so I already had a trip planned to East Africa, and I went on a sort of 4-week trip across Kenya and Tanzania, everything from hitchhiking around and crossing borders on foot, and that, as you do when you're young, thinking you're very wise. And I got through Tsavo, and I got into Tanzania, I think, and I was in the Ngorongoro and areas like that. And I'd booked a safari, and I went out on safari, and the guide said something to me like, "Oh, you know a lot about these animals. I'm surprised you're not working out here," kind of thing. And that was like a penny drop moment for me. So when I got back, I started looking into courses that were available. And, I was in my early 20s then. And I found a course to work as a ranger actually through the Southern African Wildlife College. So I started applying. And they kind of said to me, "We're not taking on foreign students at this time. This course is mainly for locals." And I think I just kept harassing them.
What year was this? Do you remember?
2006 or 7, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. So then I went over, and it turns out that they'd signed me up for a guiding course, which wasn't really exactly what I was looking for at the time. And I mean, I'd sold up everything. I'd given up the truck and moved out of my home there and everything. And so when I got there, I was kind of a little bit disappointed, having felt that, I wasn't that clear on what it was that I was doing. But I talked to the management there, and I talked to the instructors and everything like that. And they said, "Well, you've got a couple of options. We can either refund you and you can head back, or you can stick through this and try and make it work." And so I had the incredible opportunity then to meet people there at the college, like Ruben de Kock and Teresa Sowry and those people that were working there. And so doing the course, I went through the course, and I was able to join some of the trainings and everything. And then they, my instructor at the time was Nellie de Kock, who was a ranger herself, or an ex-ranger. And she really helped me to find work that wasn't in the guiding industry. And so for my work placement following the course, I actually went to where many people, started their career, and that was the Cheetah Conservation Fund. Mm-hmm. And they were looking for someone who could help do the tracking and sort of work as a junior ranger on the reserves and in the conservancy there. And so I picked up my role. And with that, I spent the first 7 months of my career there in the Nambabrand Nature Reserve, doing a cheetah reintroduction program, monitoring them, and doing sort of all the non-law enforcement roles that rangers across Africa have to commit to. Digging holes and filling them back in, fixing fences, cleaning the airstrip, all that kind of stuff, while monitoring the cheetah and working under the ranger there, a man by the name of Neil Zudendal, who really, really put a lot of faith into me and really gave me an opportunity to not only do things like join the Game Rangers Association of Africa, but also just really pitch in as best as I could there and develop those skills, which was so important. And then it was just an upward arc from there. Went back up to the main center at the Cheetah Conservation Fund and helped with the release programs and helped with a lot of the reserve management.
Yeah. Going back to the college a little bit, was Ruben already doing the ranger courses there? Was that kind of what you originally thought you were going to?
That's correct. Yeah. And it was totally understandable. And like I said, I was young and I thought that's what I was signing up for. And somewhere along the lines, the communication was crossed. But I mean, it's just, you look at it now and it's obvious why it wasn't really available to foreign students and things. And I mean, they were putting people through the courses. But like I said, I had an ex-student and instructor of his that was helping with the guiding course, who really helped take me under her wing and show me a lot of the ropes and what it meant to work as a ranger and the things that you needed to do. So it certainly wasn't wasted time. And as you know, the college is such an incredible place for all forms of learning. And if you put in the time and effort and you show that you are passionate about things and not, don't think too highly of yourself or anything like that, but you're committed, they'll really take the time and effort to help you in any way that they can.
Yeah. Did you get to go out on any bush phases or observe the rangers a little more closely at all? I don't know if you had the opportunity to do any of those kind of experiences.
A bit, yeah. We spent a lot of time running around the fence, as you've seen the guys do. We would join the rangers on their runs. We got a few opportunities to join on some of the things, like some of the fire training that the guys were doing and that. And so, yeah, that was a big part of it. But it was kind of, shadowing and learning as much as you can. And then actually going back there when I was back later on, I was invited to join courses from Ruben himself. And so I joined things like his PASOP course, which is the Protected Area Security Operations and Planning and things. And by then I was in my career more in law enforcement. So it has a way of working itself out,
Yeah.
The key to conservation is to me is just making yourself as indispensable as you can, and not having that ego, not having that thing, but just learning, working. And that's, and networking, and just, I mean, there's a good mix of luck and support from some incredible conservationists out there that are willing to give a young person a helping hand.
Absolutely. What was it like going from, you were kind of like this vagabond for a little while, seeking out these adventures in connection to outdoors and wildlife? Were you like wearing Sex Pistols shirts back then still, or like?
No. I'd made my transition. More of a Clash fan, anyways. But
gotcha.
Yeah, but no, I'd made that transition. I think as soon as I started traveling and working and things, and it just became all about the travel and seeing the world as much as possible. And when moving to Southern Africa and working there, it was, just sort of hit the ground running and just eating up every opportunity to learn and experience and things.
Did anything hit you or strike you about the people involved in this work? Because I feel like for me, my eyes are all kind of seen through making this film. I just remember being at the Wildlife College, because it was kind of the first place I stopped, and just being so impressed by the human beings doing this work. I don't know if you had a similar experience when you first started out in this, or maybe you just had a lot of connection to this from your youth as well, like rangers and other people. But I don't know if you recall being kind of struck by the types of humans doing this work and the way they kind of took you under your wing and how that affected you.
Yeah, I mean, within those sort of inner circles, you always get the saying, where they say that a ranger isn't made, they're born, and so on, and things like that. Now, there's, I'm sure, a certain element of truth to that, but it was really incredible to work with some of these people and of course, meet some of the conservationists and things that you'd read so much about. I mean, I had the opportunity to meet Dr. Ian Player, and speak with him before he passed. Had a run-in with Dr. Jane Goodall, and we shared a whiskey, which is an incredible experience. But I mean, just without the name dropping, there are just so many people, those who are elevated to the global stage and those who will fly under the radar for their entire lives, and just everyone in between. There are just some phenomenal people out there working in this field, and that's why that networking is such an important part of it. And just, you learn that, so many conservationists have a wicked sense of humor. They've got, they can have some dark sides as well, but generally people are just incredible. And I mean, some of the field rangers that I've worked with, I mean, I've got some stories that I can tell you about once I got up and working in Zimbabwe. And I mean, it's just the passion and the engagement from people is really infectious. And so, yeah, it was just a no-brainer for me right when I started that this is the career that I want, because you're surrounded by like-minded people that are all working for common goals. And it's only rarely when those goals don't align. I've always said the two biggest killers in conservation are egos and acronyms. One, because they don't meet the greater good, and the other because nobody can remember all of the different acronyms all the time.
That's so true. I remember just getting into this whole world, and I was like, there are so many acronyms; it just never ends.
Try working in the Philippines, man. Wow.
Even more. Yeah, I mean, sitting around the campfires, which is something you get to do a lot in this type of work, is there's no shortage of amazing stories and experiences that people have had. And I remember I think Ruben was really the first person I met when we got there. And yeah, he's just, he's got this background as a soldier and as a trainer, and he's deeply involved in conservation, cares so much about rangers. It was like instant respect. And, it's like this bigger than life father figure in a lot of ways. So it just really, really impressed me. And then even Anton Zimba, who passed away recently, the other hero of our film, it was kind of similar. He was a much softer character, but had so much heart and passion for the work. So yeah, the people just stood out to me above everything else. I mean, there's the landscapes and the wildlife and the beauty of the natural spaces is awe-inspiring enough, but it's the people really take it over the top,
It's such a big part of it. It really is. And I mean, yeah, Ruben's a prime example. There's so many others within the Game Rangers Association of Africa. There were so many there at the college that I remember working with as well that were just, so passionate about it. And yeah, it was an incredible opportunity.
So you were in Namibia at the Cheetah Conservation Fund, and where did you go from there? Actually, first, what was Namibia like in comparison? Was that your first time up that way?
That was my first time up that way, and I mean, I was so fortunate. I landed at the Cheetah Conservation Fund. I was there for all of 4 days, and I was sort of put under the guidance of Chris Gordon, who's another exceptional conservationist and has worked in a lot of places and things. And he sort of said, "Oh, well, we're hoping that you could go down and track some cheetah there." I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll do whatever's needed." And so I went up there and sort of got an orientation with him. And the idea was that I was going to go down to the desert and relieve the guy that was down there monitoring the cheetah for a week or two. And so I left and went down there. And the Namabrand is one of the most spectacular places I have ever seen in all of my travels. It is just an incredible part of the world. This literally means the edge of the Namib desert, and it's just this eco zone where the sort of true desert almost starts shifting into the coastal Namib and then you've got backed by this incredible mountain range, and yeah, it was just stunning. And so I went down there, and a couple of weeks became a couple of months, and they said, well, we're looking for the guy who has been working there is not coming back, so we're looking for a replacement. And I was there then for another month, and then eventually they said, you are the replacement. And then I just stayed there. And like I said, working with Niels, getting involved with other members of the Namibian Game Rangers Association of Africa, working with the NAMA staff down there, learning about everything from tracking without using telemetry, because we'd get up into the hills and you'd lose the signal for the radio collars, learning about human-wildlife conflict with the farmers surrounding the area, learning about the different ecology programs that the various lodges were doing. I mean, the Namabrand, after I left, was actually declared as, I think, Africa's first dark sky reserve, which, if you look into, is really quite fascinating. One of the lodges there had quite a large telescope there that they could use to look up at the night sky. And I mean, it's just, I thought I had the best leopard sightings there, and cheetah, and yeah, it was awesome place. And so, as a young conservationist, that was really finding the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, having been a little bit disappointed with doing a guiding course and not a ranger course, to then being out there and being thrown into the deep end. It might not be the sort of firefight that people expect when they hear rangers, but it was hard work. It was, long days, and it was everything that you sort of expect that a ranger has to do without the law enforcement aspect necessarily. So fixing water holes and all of it, right?
What was the cheetah population like when you were there?
This was the first group that had been reintroduced. They hadn't had anything other than transient cheetah there for a long time. And so we reintroduced 5 males, and shortly after we found that there were females moving through the area and everything as well. And so, yeah, it was incredible. And I mean, I got to see these 5 cheetah that had not been born in captivity. They had been raised and then reintroduced. And I mean, we were told, okay, they're going to start hunting the smaller game and things, and we have to feed them, supplementary feed them, and build their skills and things. And then almost right away, they started hunting things like the Gemsbok, the oryx. We saw them try to hunt a giraffe, saw them, jumping on the back of hartebeest and things. And it was just, yeah, again, you think back on these experiences and you're like, this is just crazy that, I had the chance to basically sit and every day get these National Geographic-esque experiences that were just beyond my wildest dreams before I started, while at the same time being expected to do backbreaking work in and around it.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. I mean, it's almost like they're kind of your kids too, because you want to see them succeed and, taking care of them when things go wrong. And for some reason, I think cheetahs have always been my favorite big cat. It just, the way they move and walk and just hold themselves, is something about them just really attracts me to them. So that had to be a super experience. Yeah. So where did you go from there? I know you kind of worked your way more into the anti-poaching side eventually, did some traveling.
Yeah, it kind of happened. It kind of happened by accident, really, with a bit of planning, I suppose. Happy accident. I went back up after we finished that sort of project there. I went back up to the Cheetah Conservation Fund and was working there and helping with other releases and mainly helping the reserve manager again as sort of the junior ranger, doing a lot of the fences, but also supporting the black rhino monitoring, doing controlled burns, responding to wildfires, all of the fun stuff, the stuff that keeps you outdoors and keeps you, with your hands in the dirt. And so then towards the end there, we had a big stint of poaching. Actually, there was an organized group of individuals who were targeting the different farms all around the sort of Ochivarongo and beyond area of Namibia. And what they were doing was they were waiting while all of the cattle and livestock, because CCF also had this model farm so that they could look at human wildlife conflict and also show that cheetahs can coexist in and around farm areas. Very cool model with the livestock guarding dogs as well. And they had this farm, and so they had a lot of cattle. And basically, the syndicate was going out and they were putting up these massive, massive amounts of wire snares, big, thick cable snares that were indiscriminately catching anything on these farms, because the farmers there would often release the cattle and then just sort of bring them back in the winter season.
What were they focusing on in terms of what were they trying to poach?
Everything that they could, everything they could. They weren't targeting the rhino because they did have black rhino around there. They had white rhino as well up on the Waterberg Plateau, but they weren't specifically targeting a high value species necessarily. Like,
was it more bushmeat?
It was just for the meat trade. And so, yeah, they'd set up these camps because you'd get into these areas of this large conservancy where nobody would get to visit all the time. It's not like we had the budget or a team of rangers that could go out and patrol. There was sort of myself and one other guy that would be going out and looking for these things. And then we eventually found that the syndicate was camping there, and they'd been camping there for months, and they would put out these huge snares, and they would effectively wait until they heard or saw that an animal had been caught, whether it was wildlife or whether it was livestock, and then they would just go up and just butcher it with axes while it was still alive, and hang the meat out and dry it into biltong or dried meat, like jerky almost, and load it into bags and then take it and sell it in town. And so we started connecting the dots with this and working together with the police. We had an aerial unit. We had the Ministry of Environment and Tourism, and we would go out and we'd stay overnight monitoring, watching for these guys coming back in, dismantling camps or setting up lay-in waits for them to return to the camps. And we had a couple of big breakthroughs with the plane. We also managed to find that they had been hiding their rubbish and things like that, garbage, in an aardvark hole. And so doing some careful investigation, we found that, they'd been using those scratch cards for topping up your phone plan. And they were able to find and contact the police contacted the communications company, who then linked it back to the phone, managed to make a couple of busts, and then they'd been hanging all the meat with using this twine, and very black twine, almost like knitting thread. And so they would then go into town and find the places that were selling meat that was covered in these fine black hairs. And I made a couple of busts there, and that was it. I was sold. I mean, it was not just the adventure and the excitement about it. It was seeing, these animals butchered in the field and the wanton waste of what they couldn't take. And so I'd had some thoughts then that that's more of the avenue that I wanted my career to take.
Was that group violent at all towards the people trying to stop them? Were there any incidents like that, or was it peacefully handled?
There were a couple of incidents. Not sure how much I can say about it, but no loss of life, fortunately. A few exchanges, but basically it all went smoothly. They managed to make some fairly high-profile arrests within that syndicate and things, and I wasn't directly involved with that. I was all involved on the ground element. But with that, we were sort of tasked with the responsibility of doing a lot of evidence collection for the police, so documenting everything, recording all the waypoints of camps, photographing everything, photographing footprints, following up on fresh footprints and tracks. And so, it was really, really exciting. And from there, I'd had some leave planned already, and I'd never been up into Zimbabwe and Zambia. And I took the opportunity to start reaching out to contacts in both those countries. And at that point, the Thin Green Line film had just come out. And so I sort of made it a combined holiday trip, but mostly visiting national parks and taking that documentary, learning about, the fact that so many rangers, and this is going back to 2009, I think, early 2010, so many rangers didn't have any form of insurance or medical coverage and things. So that was where that sort of spark happened. And I said, I'm going to take this film and I reached out to Sean Wilmore, and he said, do whatever you can, make as many copies as you want, share it, spread it around. And I took the forms for if rangers needed assistance and a bunch of these copies of these DVDs and just went around to these different national parks and handed them out and spoke to people. And yeah, so looking back on it, it just sort of was this idea that sparked that drive to really help support rangers right then and there. Having had a small taste of what some rangers experience, that was it for me.
Do you remember watching that film for the first time? How did you get a hold of that? Because I interviewed Sean about that and how it all came about, and that was quite an adventure for him on his side. But it's kind of cool to hear it impact you and you taking it around and sharing it.
It had just come out, and at that point in my career, I was still, apart from doing the odd data entry, I didn't use computers much. I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't have anything. And so I remember going into the office and just sort of going on when we used to get our free internet time and just Googling rangers and that, and the Thin Green Line documentary came up. And so I just ordered it. And yeah, and eventually, a few weeks later, whatever, it came through, the copy of the DVD and everything, watched it at home on our DVD player, and that was it. Yeah.
Yeah. Did anything strike you about that? I mean, it was kind of cool that he managed to go so many different places in the world. So you get to get a little bit of a perspective of rangers from around the world. I don't know if anything stood out to you from that experience.
Absolutely. It was the first, I think, opportunity to really connect the dots for me. Like, oh, okay. So when I was really young back in Canada, the conservation officers there that are doing this human wildlife conflict with, or they're working with the bear or the cougar or in the forests there, then they're doing the same job as these rangers here, slightly different. And then when all these countries that I've had the opportunity to visit where people are doing different aspects of the job, it's all kind of the same thing. It's all, it was remarkable. And that was a big, again, penny drop moment that, hey, this is an interconnected web of people that are trying to do the same thing that's really not all that connected. And it was surprising to me. And so sort of Sean's trip out there was the first time that I think I had seen anybody try to connect all of that and say, look, guys, we're all out here doing the same thing, whether you're in India or in Central America or, wherever, Australia, we're all in this for the same goals and trying to achieve the same thing. And many of us are facing the same challenges, the same difficulties. And so, yeah, that was a real eye-opener for me.
And then, yeah, just seeing some of the lack of support. I mean, I feel like it's tough for rangers everywhere, even in like the US and probably in Canada too. It's not the most well-paid job in the world, especially in some of these other countries. It's amazing the passion and dedication that people have with so little in terms of support. So it sounded like you were kind of trying to collect some more data, spread the message, and you went on this trip. And what happened from there? I think part of it, you ran into the International Anti-Poaching Foundation, and maybe that's part of the stories too, you could tell. But what was that whole trip like, and how did that take you more deeper into the anti-poaching world?
Well, after, living in Zimbabwe for so long, later on, when I look back on this trip, I think it's remarkable how it came together, because being totally naive, I just started emailing national parks departments and contacts that I'd made through the Cheetah Conservation Fund. They'd had a big human wildlife conflict training course, and a lot of people came out for that. And I'd met some of the people there from Zimbabwe and Zambia and made connections. And I'm in contact with some of those people still today. So I just started emailing everybody that I could, looking up names and saying, hey, here I am. I'd love to come spread the message. And looking back on it now, I mean, I've been guilty of this myself, people coming out wanting to help, and they're just kind of like, we're a little bit too busy. We've got a lot going on the ground. Can't really babysit, a kid that just wants to come out here and get involved. And I totally get it and understand it now. But I did get a few responses, and remarkably, I got three, I should say, very positive responses. One was from a contact within Zimbabwe National Parks and Wildlife Management. One was from Damien from the International Anti-Poaching Foundation, and one was from another colleague from the Game Rangers Association, William Soko in Zambia. And so Zim Park said, well, come in, tell us what you want to do, and we'll see what we can facilitate. And so they said, fine, yeah, if you want to go show this DVD and show rangers about this insurance thing, by all means, go ahead. And that, again, still surprises me to this day. I went into the head parks office. I went into Wangi. I went into Mana Pools. I went into the Lower Zambezi National Park in Victoria Falls and showed this documentary, talked to rangers about their challenges and their strives and exchanged stories and things like that. And it was remarkable. And then when I was in Victoria Falls, I met with Damien and a few of his other colleagues and he had just started the International Anti-Poaching Foundation and was just getting his sort of feet on the ground there in Zimbabwe. And we talked a lot about, my experiences and then having worked with an NGO, everything from opportunities to fundraising to some of the things that I'd seen that worked and what didn't and so on, and how to form collaborations and things. And we chatted and got along great. Yeah, from there, I just carried on with the trip, went on into Zambia and sort of not really thought any more about it. I had a great trip through Zambia, presenting in Kafue National Park and Kasanka way up in the north, and the Lower Zambezi there with William Soko and so on, and then made it back to Namibia and sort of went back to work. And a few weeks later, I actually got an email from Damien and said, we're starting our first training course. We're going to bring on some volunteers to assist. Would you be able to come up and spend, sort of, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks or something for the course? Now, bearing in mind, at that point, like I said, Damien was just starting out. His friend and colleague, Steve, was helping him out. And they both had the military background, but no conservation background at that stage. And so they wanted a few people in conservation, I think, to come help with this training. And so CCF very kindly gave me the opportunity to go back again. And I did and helped out with the training. And at the end of it, Damien just sort of took me aside and said, so what's it going to take to get you to stay on board? And I said, well, I'm not making much money there. I know you haven't got much money making there, but if you can pay me and feed me something, then I'll join on. And that's how I started. And I spent 5 years with the IAPF, working mainly at the Victoria Falls site. I mean, I don't have a military background at all. It was purely conservation by that point, and I was still sort of only like 3 or 4 years into my career at that stage. But just the amount that I was able to learn from them, from a sort of paramilitary aspect, not necessarily the combat or anything like that, but the structure and the formality and the sort of professionalization that you could bring to a unit around everything from understanding standard operating procedures to situational awareness and operational security. These kind of things are things that will stick with me forever. And so it was an incredible learning experience working under them and working with people who continue to work with the IAPF today, like Leon Varley and stuff like that, who's got a long career in conservation in Zimbabwe, and other people that I cross paths with there. And then, the work of the IPF just sort of grew and grew, and Damien was having to spend less time in Zimbabwe. And so I was taking over more and more responsibilities there on site. And that's really where the skills in terms of law enforcement and everything built. I mean, I was working as more or less the warden for that rhino reserve. We had the black rhino population, and we were running everything from full moon patrols to, daily patrols, and just out in the field, putting in all of the hours while trying to manage the onset of this sort of new NGO or nonprofit. And we had a volunteer program that I'd helped set up, and we were monitoring, and it just sort of went from strength to strength. But spending all of that time there in Victoria Falls and being a part of all of it, from helping to dehorn rhino, to do buffalo translocation, to a painted dog reintroduction into the reserve, as well as the poaching incidents. It was snare removals, all of it. It was an incredible experience, and that's really where I got my footing in that sort of law enforcement side of things, and working for an anti-poaching unit full time, 24 hours a day, and until 2016, I was on the African continent for 8 years, hardly taking a day off, just working, getting into it. So
yeah, work is life in that context. So was the poaching crisis in terms of rhinos really taking off then? Did you notice what was going on before you got connected with APF?
Yeah, that was part of it. It was really starting to ramp up then. I mean, like I said, it was 2010, and it sort of, as you know, it sort of really started to pick up in 2008 and go on right up into 2013, when it really, was becoming a crisis. So yeah, working with them, I mean, we were constantly on edge. I mean, you might hear a gunshot from someone trying to scare an elephant outside of the reserve, and you'd have to respond to go follow up and see what it was. Constantly doing scenario-based training using various different curriculums that we'd been working with to just keep everybody up on edge, and really trying to create a unit that was the best of the best. And then, of course, employing some of those skills that Damien and Steve brought from their military background, while constantly making sure that you were training conservationists, not just soldiers. So yeah, it was really important to find that balance. And that's, I think, where I was able to learn things from them, but was also able to bring in things like the conservation philosophy and the foundation of, well, why are we doing this? Why is this important? It's not an us versus them mentality. Who are the poachers? Who are they? They're not just an unnamed bad guy. They are people living in and around the communities as well. At the same time, there were people that would come in that weren't from the surrounding communities, who had one intention. And how do you manage that, right? We had really, really interesting cases there where, often in the conservation world, we'll divide the poaching into two components, which is your subsistence poaching and then your commercial poaching. And the commercial are, the folks going after the ivory and the rhino horn and the lion bones and so on, pangolin, whereas the subsistence are people that are trying to feed themselves. In Zimbabwe, we did see elements of this sort of sport poaching, where people didn't want to spend the big money to go out and hunt a buffalo. They didn't want to pay for a full 5-day safari in South Africa. So they would hire a guide basically to take them up and illegally hunt a buffalo so they could get a quick photo of them, posing with it and then get away. And we would catch wind of these things, and you'd be on these late night stakeouts waiting for this vehicle to come through. And, you'd be even having grown up in Canada, I think one of the coldest nights I've ever spent was lying on the railway tracks with a team of rangers, where we'd each be getting sort of, half an hour of sleep and then switch over and back, just monitoring, because we thought that these guys were going to come through and try to hunt buffalo. And so you're just out there and you got your night vision, and it was freezing cold. You couldn't move, but that was all part of it. Looking back on it, it sounds fun and thrilling, but it really was just, that was work. That was the job. Yeah.
Do you remember your first rhino carcass that was poached and approaching that, or is that an experience that you can recall? Or maybe there were too many of them. I don't know how bad it was in that area, but
we never lost a rhino on that property, that I can say. Why, I think, is a combination, because we did have a very, very good team. We put in a lot of hours on protecting the area. There was possibly also political reasons. Maybe there was a sort of no-go zone. There had been attempts, but we never lost a rhino, fortunately. But in South Africa, I did see it a lot. I think the worst thing about it is, and we'll talk a bit more about the elephant poaching, but I wish I could tell you I remembered the first, but I've seen so many that I can't actually pinpoint which was the first one. In a reserve in South Africa somewhere.
Well, what's that experience like for people that don't know? Because I think it's a pretty compelling experience. I've probably seen 2 or 3 carcasses, and yeah, it just kind of overwhelms the senses in some way.
I'm probably not the best person to ask about that because I think with rhino, I've seen quite a few, but with elephant especially, I would say I'm far too desensitized now with, and we can get onto it, but when I moved up further north in Zimbabwe, one of the first tasks that we had was to create a database of the elephant carcasses in the Sabungwe area near Kariba and Bumi Hills, where I ended up working before joining GWC Rewild. And I mean, over those first couple of years, we did 200 and something carcass investigations, everything from, less than a day old to 10, 15 years plus, where you're just looking at bones. But we would do ballistic recovery and catalog everything. And often that would mean standing waist deep in the carcass, pulling out, looking for the ballistics, looking for the rounds and things. And yeah, that was kind of like the next level of it. I mean, we were very secure in Victoria Falls. We did a great job. There were a lot of thrilling moments for sure. There was a lot of close calls and things with wildlife, with people, but nothing compared to when I moved up further north and we were looking at that level of elephant poaching up there. I think it would have been very different had I seen that scale with rhino as well. But at least the majority of my memory with rhino are of them alive and of tracking them and encountering them in the bush and seeing how different they can be from when they show up at your house to when you stumble across them in the bush, and having a huge amount of respect and admiration for the species from that. That's kind of what sticks in my mind with rhino. I've got a great anecdote for that. With elephants, it's different. For me, elephants equates death.
I mean, did that experience change you in any way? Change the course of what you're doing at all, or just the way you feel about it? I mean, that's a lot of carcasses to experience it. And I feel like elephants too. I mean, rhinos are these beautiful creatures, but elephants have even stronger personality, or, it's even more social. And I feel like if you get to know elephants, seeing that many, maybe you're desensitized by this point, but what was the effect over time?
It does make you desensitized. And the thing is, I had a bit of a shell before, I've got to say, because like many of my colleagues and peers in conservation, I was not one of those that got in because of a love or a need or a desire to touch and hold and cuddle the wildlife or whatever it might be. And I generally don't have anything against the people that get into it for that. But even with the cheetah, I didn't particularly want to interact with them and touch them and pet them because I didn't feel that was necessary. But seeing them in the wild doing what they do and everything was really important for me. And that was, the most incredible thing. And with that now, I mean, every time I see an elephant, I think, I still have had this incredible opportunity to work with them and know how emotive they are and just the way that they behave and react around death themselves and all of that. And I mean, sure, so many people have heard the stories about them coming back and visiting carcasses. And yeah, I can contest to that for sure. I've seen, the damage they can cause when they are put into a situation where there's conflict with humans. I mean, we did first response as well for people who had come into that. And so you've seen some pretty gruesome effects of when people run in head to head with elephant as well. But yeah, for me now, I find it a little bit difficult to see elephant because I know it's not true, but I do at times feel like I've seen more dead ones than alive ones, which I know isn't true, but it still sticks with you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I was at one post-mortem on a rhino, and it's a very intense experience. The smell, the just taking apart the body to find a bullet and things like that. It's a sad experience, and to see that hundreds of times, I can only imagine what that kind of do to the feeling.
It's kind of a worse experience to feel like you've gotten used to it. That was the hardest thing for me. With the rhino, I've got very positive memories, fantastic memories. I remember being in Victoria Falls at the ranger station, and I was manning the station there, and occasionally, wildlife would come right up to it. I saw some phenomenal things from there. We had a great viewpoint, and hippo and lion battling. We saw painted dogs taking down bushback and all sorts. But one day I was on the phone with Damien. We were just catching up. I think he was in South Africa, or he might have been traveling to the States or something. And we were on a call catching up, talking about the sort of next few months' plans and what that was going to look like. And all of a sudden, all of the electricity went out because we're using Wi-Fi calling. And I thought, what was that? And so I grab a flashlight and walk around to the back of the ranger station, and there's this big, beautiful cow rhino, and she was just munching on a bush, and she chewed right through the electricity cable without being phased. She just chewed it enough not to be harmed, but to cut the power. And I thought, okay, so I think, how did we do it? Yeah. Or no, it was the internet cable she chewed through. Yeah, that's right. And so I just called Damien back on the phone itself, knowing how expensive that was and how little funds we had at that time. And I just said, yeah, I can't talk anymore. The rhinos just chewed through the internet cable. And there was silence for a couple of seconds. And he just goes, okay, mate. Yeah, we'll catch up over email when you can. And that was it. And that was just life, And so seeing those rhino and just interacting with them that closely and having ones that, wander into the kitchen every once in a while and things was amazing. So very positive memories of that. Yeah, I do. My heart goes out to those who have seen the other side of it for rhino. And I know does for me with the elephant.
Yeah. It sounds like some beautiful experiences. I mean, you said you were kind of just this naive kid jumping in and going on this trip and calling all these people up. But, sometimes those are when the best things happen, when you're kind of just following some passion or desire, and it took you down this path. And there were just enough people to say yes that, kind of continued the journey and took you places you might not have imagined. So yeah, I think that's just kind of a thing to remember. Sometimes you got to follow those little callings.
Well, from there, I'd been with the IAPF for just a little over 5 years, and it was all going well. I had no plans on changing. But then, we decided to change the management in Vic Falls because, I'd sort of done my time there, and it's always good to rotate out. And I think the IAPF had really started to pick up in Mozambique, and I think Damien was hoping that I might be able to contribute out there. And the organization had gone through a few board changes and things, and they were also looking at some sites up in northern Zimbabwe at that stage. And one of those sites was a place called Bumi Hills, and that was in just another incredible location right on Lake Kariba. It was in collaboration with the Bumi Hills Safari Lodge, and they were at the sort of northern point of this area called the Sabungwe, which includes Matusadona National Park and a whole tribal trust land, the Ome Tribal Trust land, all throughout the area. And they had at that point lost like 75% of the elephant population in about 10 years. Huge amounts of poaching coming from Zimbabwe, coming across from Zambia, from elephant were just getting hit in all points. And it was kind of like the Wild West. There was a few operations working in and around that area. There was Zim Parks working in the Matusadona National Park, but there was just so much land and area where there wasn't any protection. And Bumi Hills itself was a non-consumptive safari lodge. So there was no hunting there. And so you would get a mass amount of these elephants that would sort of congregate there, because there was some other areas where there was still hunting going on. And I think a lot of people assumed or were convinced that hunting was still viable there, even though the population had taken such a hammering. And so I went up there with the IAPF, with the guys of sort of taking over that project and everything like that. And at some point, I think it was a management decision, was that this is a very different site. It's not as defensible. It's not as important. And so they decided to not, that wasn't the project that they were going to really invest in, because they were looking to obviously make as much impact as they could.
Yeah.
But for me personally, I just felt like this was the little area that could. And so when they came to me and said, well, do you want to come on and just take over the anti-poaching operation together with another guy? Would you start from the ground up, do it the way that you want to do it, run it? It was too much of an opportunity to pass up. And so I departed amicably from the IAPF and joined what became the Bumi Hills Anti-Poaching Unit and Bumi Hills Foundation. And it was a sort of separate entity from the lodge. We were having to raise funds as much as we could. We had the backing of a very generous local family who was doing so much support for the area, and myself and a guy called Mark Brightman, who, funnily enough, his brother is Charles Brightman, runs the Victoria Falls anti-poaching unit. Yeah, we helped to start or reestablish, I should say, the Bumi Hills anti-poaching operation. And there was Nick Milne, who was the sort of foundation manager, and we just got to do it the way that we wanted to do it. And like I said, we were going through and doing all these carcass investigations. We were working with trying to set up this team to at least prevent the poaching in and around that Bumi Hills. And yeah, it was a hard start. We lost quite a few in the beginning, but then by the time I left, hadn't lost an elephant in over 2 years. So
wow. Yeah. So it had a real impact there. Did you build a ranger corps from scratch too, or?
I wouldn't even really call it a corps. It was a handful of men that were working there, that were stationed there, and that would just really, really work hard. We got to handpick. We built up the training. We would, obviously, I was on a work permit there. I wasn't a Zimbabwean citizen, so we would outsource some of the training, which I felt wasn't acceptable to be delivered by myself. I'm more than comfortable around firearms, but I'd rather get them certified. And so we outsourced that to guys that could do that there. And the same with first aid. We wanted them to be certified. We wanted them to have the certificates and feel confident in their skills. And so, yeah, we do all the training ourselves, and then really look at those aspects where they needed to have certification and competence in certain skills that, you really wanted to have recognized as by the local authorities and so on.
Yeah, it sounds like this project kind of took the full force of all of your experience leading up to that point to pull this off.
Very much so. And that's where, it was so important for my career on the international level now, because that's where I started really, really believing in this sort of greater need to professionalize the role of the ranger. Not saying that other sites hadn't done it. It was so individual, and it was so everybody doing it in their own little bubble, and you're sort of having to create your own code of conducts and ethics and create things like that. There wasn't there wasn't a zero poaching toolkit, or there wasn't a suite of materials that was available to everybody then at that time, or at least there weren't that many. So we were just all sort of trying to scramble to do it together, and then reaching out to other organizations and people to exchange information. Hey, have you got a template for SOPs? And then Ruben and I sitting down the next Game Rangers Association meeting, we need a ranger toolkit where we can have an SOP template and a code of conduct and ethics template. And a lot of the ideas and the things that are coming to sort of fruition now were generated at those times just through conversations with a lot of different people. And so, yeah, it was an exciting time. It sort of, you could feel that the change was coming, and the growth of things, even like World Ranger Day, which I think the first one was started in 2007, and it was a big affair for those that were involved, but on the global scale, a lot of people hadn't heard about it. Now this year we're in 2022, and up to even my little local parks department is having a World Ranger Day celebration, and we got World Female Ranger Week, and we've got these incredible, stories from all around the world that are coming together, where people are supporting and are crying out for the professionalization of the ranger. And so it's a really exciting time.
Let's go a little more into your role now at Rewilds, how you got involved in that, what a wildlife crime prevention officer is, and what you're doing. And I think that kind of ties in too with these higher level things you're talking about, like code of conduct and other organizations coming together to professionalize the Corps, and just this more holistic approach you're taking too. So why don't you kind of lead us into how you made your move there, and what your role is and what your work consists of?
Well, at this stage, we were really hitting the ground hard with Bumi Hills. I had no intention of going anywhere. I was loving the work there. I was loving having the opportunity to sort of run my own unit and learn from others, and build on mistakes and capitalize on successes and all of that, build relationships. And without really knowing it, I was shifting more at that stage to preventative approaches rather than full-on anti-poaching. Anti-poaching, as most people will tell you, is very reactionary. You hear a gunshot, you respond to it. You find a carcass, you react to it. You patrol and you look for that needle in the haystack, hoping you come across someone. You get intelligence and you work off of that. I was looking at other opportunities for like, well, how can we get in? And so many projects and things say they're doing community engagement. Well, what does that mean? People, in my experience, a lot of people didn't like going in and talking to communities because they'd be told, get all your animals out here. We don't want to deal with this. They're raiding our crops. We don't want to talk to people in all green uniforms that are coming around. And who are you from Canada coming and telling me what to do? And it's different.
Yeah, people don't want to have those hard conversations.
Yeah, it was tough. It was really tough. But when you do start making ground with that, you can really build relationships, and you can do things. And we started, spending a lot of time in activities like offering search and rescue response for Lake Kariba for some of the local communities in exchange for having the communities themselves monitor and police, for lack of a better term, the illegal fishing and so on, and reporting in snares. And some of the best intelligence and information we would get was from things like school teachers that were just saying, hey, we've got people moving through the area with firearms. We don't want firearms in and around here, in and around the kids. And so can you please help to discourage this and get them out of there? And, so this relationship building and these looking at all these different methods had really piqued my interest. And at that point, I didn't know anything about criminology or anything like that. But the change in government happened. Mugabe went out, and things went very different in Zimbabwe for a while there. And at one point, I found myself without a work permit, and anti-poaching is not something that you should do without the proper backing. Trust me, so I had to leave, and I decided to take that sort of leave that I hadn't taken in well over 8 years by that stage, and leave the continent. And I went home to visit my family, who I hadn't seen in a long time. And I went to the World Ranger Congress in Denver. And there I met Dr. Barney Long. And so I met Barney there, and we got chatting and talking, and I met a lot of other people that I'd met at previous World Ranger Congresses and were now well acquainted with and things. But Barney and I kept talking, and I went back to Zimbabwe. I got my permit again. Everything was fine. I went back to work for another year or so. And then it happened again, and there was a big push, and a lot of us sort of people that were working there in Zim either didn't have their permits renewed or had them revoked or whatever. It's a tricky climate. It's very political. And so I had to leave once again, and I moved back. I ended up traveling for quite a bit. I went all across Western China and into Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, and just did the dream trip that I'd been dreaming of for a while. And yeah, that was just all personal trip. Then I went back to Canada for a bit. And from there, I was kind of rudderless for a little while. And so Barney reached out and said, I've been talking to you for a while now about this wildlife crime prevention officer position. Would you be willing to come down for an interview? So I did that. And yeah, I got the job and signed the paperwork the same day that my permit came through for Zimbabwe, of course. So I said, okay, I went back there and worked out the end of 2017 and did another 3 months there, and then moved back to Canada. And the role right from the very beginning has been, a lot of what I've been progressing towards throughout my whole career. It's that ability to work on a global scale and just really try to have an impact by working with conservationists and people from all different walks of life and background, whether it's academia, whether it's field work, whether it's, a combination of both. And now, Rewild's such a different organization, and it was so unique to me. My only experience having been with some of the other larger NGOs and, the sort of model that they use in working in different protected areas with big projects and things like that. Rewild was so different to me, whereas it was like, well, we don't actually have any country offices, or there's no company vehicles or anything like that. So get that out of your head. And, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be going to the places that really need assistance and working with local partners and local organizations that want help. And whether that's through crime prevention, whether that's through enhancing their law enforcement approach. So it was kind of like what I did with Bumi Hills, but now being able to help all of these different sites and support those interventions and basically act as a subject matter expert to really just try to help, each of these sites achieve, positive impact and success towards whether it is improving conditions for their rangers and their protected area staff on the ground, or whether it is getting them sort of up to that next level. And so that's a big part of my role. And the wildlife crime prevention aspect has meant that I've been able to work and collaborate and learn from this incredible group of people, mostly women, that have built this conservation criminology approach, which takes so much from the policing world and puts it into a conservation context and uses things like situational crime prevention, which allows you to effectively look at all of your intervention techniques and look at them in this sort of matrix perspective so that you can say, well, for example, it will put them into these 5 different categories of increasing the risks and decreasing the rewards and reducing provocations, removing excuses, and so on. And so you can then think about all of the things that I'm doing. So I'm increasing the risk to poachers by, hiring more staff, doing more patrols, doing more targeted patrols. We're reducing the rewards to them by dehorning or by collaring the animals or whatever we're doing. We're removing excuses by putting up signage, by making people aware that what they're doing is illegal and this is how you could be fined, or this is the prospective jail time. And then we're also removing provocations by looking at different livelihood interventions and programs that we can help support communities with so they don't have to do this. And it allows you to frame all of that in a way. And man, if I'd had that years ago, you think of the impact you could have had. I mean, we had good impact, but it sort of was like a light bulb moment again. And so to be able to collaborate on these things and bring a lot of this element from the criminology world, which has been sort of novel approaches for the longest time, or has been sort of stuck in academia, and help to practically apply that on the ground. I'm very passionate about that and extremely fortunate to be where I am today and be able to do that, move away from just anti-poaching, still understanding the necessary role that it plays, and at the same time being able to look at that sort of a much more holistic solution for each of these individual sites and everywhere that is so different from one another.
Yeah, it's really exciting. So these different sites, they'll basically call you in, and then you kind of aid them in implementing this type of matrix and kind of giving them almost like an analysis of the situation and how they can apply different aspects of this, or what's kind of the process? I don't know if you have an example. You don't even have to name the area.
I mean, yeah, it's one of those things where when I first got into conservation, and the real, I think, driving force for me, it wasn't, as I said, being able to be really close and interact and cuddle with the animals. It was a lot more selfish than that. It was, I wanted a challenge and I wanted a job where I could work outside and that every day was different. Now I might be a little bit more desk bound and computer bound, but every day is different. And I'm working with all of these different sites and individuals as well, and organizations, and helping to work in these huge partnerships like URSA and like the SMART partnership. And then when I do go into the field, which is still quite frequently, being able to get there on the ground level and make sure that it's working. And so we've got an illegal wildlife trade challenge fund grant going on in Vietnam, for example, in Pumat National Park, which is an incredible area. And that's looking at not only improving the quality of life and the functionality of the teams there that are doing the protection for the park, it's also establishing and helping to build on community conservation teams, work on livelihood programs, look at women as part of the driving force of the trade and how you can interact with them to mitigate some of the illegal wildlife trade and so on. And so it's very rewarding work because you're able to apply support all different elements of it, rather than just how can we lock this place down and protect it as best we can while we try to figure out the solution. You're like, okay, well, that is one part of it, but there's also other pieces to the puzzle. And so let's work with the teams that are doing that on the ground and then provide them as much support as we can outside of that. And that's at the ground level. And then on the global level, there's all this work with URSA, the Universal Ranger Support Alliance, and so on.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit about the Universal Ranger Support Alliance and how Rewild got involved and like what you're trying to do from your end and what's the overarching goal, I guess?
Sure. So when I was still at working in Kariba in northern Zimbabwe, I started using Smart there, and Smart was the spatial monitoring, or is the spatial monitoring and reporting tool. It's a great software program that allows you to capture data and analyze that data and really get an understanding of what's going on in your protected area, in your field. But on top of that, it's also this incredible partnership of 9 different conservation organizations that are all working together for similar goals. And I hadn't really heard of that before, because way back then, you think of all these different NGOs, they're all sort of competing with one another in a sense, collaborating here and there, but they're all sort of working to do their own thing. And I found out that it wasn't like that. Here's this smart partnership. Then they are really collaborating to provide support for protected area staff and for those on the ground, and they're doing it together. And that was really, an eye opener again for me, and really exciting, and something that I felt very passionate about was not just this technology, but this whole approach. And so in 2019, where we met at the World Ranger Congress in Nepal, that was where quite a few people, myself, Mike Appleton, who's also with Rewild, but is with the World Commission on Protected Areas as well, Barney, members of the International Ranger Federation, of WWF, of all sorts of different organizations. I mean, having these side conversations and everything, we said, well, we've got the International Ranger Federation and we've got the Thin Green Line Foundation also doing this incredible work, but we need to do more and work together with them to look at some of the policy aspects, and how can we really build on all of this work and this awareness. I mean, Thin Green Line and IRF, they've been doing such a great job in bringing awareness to the sort of plight of the ranger, and not just those in Africa, but all over the world. And now it's like, well, we had representatives at that World Ranger Congress from the International Labor Organization who, upon hearing about some of the challenges rangers face, the comments was, geez, many rangers have worse conditions than those living and working in sweatshops. And you think these are the people that by 3030 are being charged with, as part of the 3030 initiative, are being charged with protecting 30% of the planet. And many of them are working without or under minimum wage, with no medical care or insurance or pension plan or anything. And it's crazy. And so the conversation sort of led to, well, we've got all these different support systems. You've got your ambulatory services, your police, your firefighters, all of that. And they're sort of, because they protect people, they're sort of at this level. But those in the environmental services just aren't there yet. They're not even recognized clearly in the International Labor Organization's framework. And so we said we need to start really working towards that. And so that's where, again, a group of conservation organizations together with the International Ranger Federation have all started working together to say, how can we make this change? And how can we bring this to the attention of the bodies like the International Labor Organization? How can we develop something like a code of conduct that can support all rangers everywhere, but they can at least give them the framework to build their own as well? And we're working on other elements of support that will do the same. And so again, it's not reinventing the wheel. It's not taking anything, but it's using that global platform and that international awareness of all these different conservation organizations and working towards common goals for the professionalization of rangers, so that we can build on things like the Life on the Frontline report and get a better understanding of, well, there's so many people out there that are willing to help rangers at this particular protected area or this particular, how do we generate that help for them as a total? And I mean, to date, we don't even have a clear, concise number on how many rangers are there. I've worked with rangers in the Caribbean that are doing the role of a ranger, but they didn't even know that they were classified as a ranger. So there's a lot of work to be done, but it's just fantastic to be a part and sort of be a founding part of this alliance that is really working towards that greater professionalization and long-term support for rangers around the world.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And it kind of goes back to, you watching that original film that Sean made, The Thin Green Line.
Yeah.
And you see all these rangers around the world, and all of them are in kind of varying ranges of support behind them. And I mean, that's something that definitely impressed me, or was impressed upon me, the fact that so many rangers lack so much support, and to see all of these organizations come together to really find a way to, put together what, this job looks like and what professionalize it, and then find ways to actually, whether that's putting pressure on different organizations to actually make these changes within these countries. It's a huge task, but a very important one. I remember I might have been talking to Rohit from WWF, and he was saying, like, some of these countries, rangers are classified as like circus performers, or forestry or something like that, or it's nothing even close to what fire and police would be considered, which they definitely face just as many challenges and do a lot of that work themselves on top of all this conservation work. So yeah, really exciting stuff. And hoping with this film too, it's a very South African context for the story, but to be able to promote this bigger cause and help bring more awareness to the stories and things that rangers are doing around the world is super close to us. So yeah, looking forward to doing some more support there.
That's exactly it. And I mean, it's just shocking, some of the areas that I still visit now, and you see not just the conditions that rangers work in, but everything from the contracts that they're provided with, being insufficient, to a lack of job descriptions, or anything. And you think, how can you send people out into the field to protect and to conserve what is there for all of us, and what is all of our responsibility to protect and conserve, and not even give them a clear definition on what they're supposed to be doing, the authority to do it, the funding to do it. I mean, that's why when you meet people like Anton, so many of the rangers that I've had the fortune to work with, that go out there every day and are so passionate about it still. And I know two examples from my time at the IAPF. One was a ranger called Taishan Mpande, who was hit by a buffalo, and he was nearly killed. The buffalo got caught up, its horns got caught up in his webbing, and he managed to roll out of it, and the buffalo ran off, and I was raced back from town and managed to meet him at the hospital, and he was banged up really bad. And the first thing he said to me was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I think I've lost my GPS." And you're like, come on, man, there's more things. But again, went straight back out in the field as soon as he was able to, had no ill will towards the buffalo, just sort of said, "Oh, well, it was an accident. This was an angry one. I think he'd been hunted before, so no wonder he was angry." Another guy, Sinzani Shibangu, who is an incredible ranger. He was attacked by a crocodile while on duty, lost his finger, was hit in the head quite severely. We thought we were going to lose him for a while. He was all scarred up, banged up. As soon as he came back to work, he saw a crocodile. I can't say it was the same one, but a crocodile in the river, and he just got the biggest grin on his face, shook his finger at it and said, "Oh, I'm watching you this time," And I sat down with him and said, "How do you feel about it? How do you feel about this now?" And he says, I was close to the water, and it's not his fault. It's, this is the environment that we work in. And that, again, it's just like the people that do that every single day, the men and women, it's remarkable. And the people like those who would be working with Anton and, on his unit and team, that can get up and go to work the next morning after something like that happens to someone, it's fantastic, And it's not just in Africa. You see it all around the world, all over the world. Everywhere there's a ranger, they've got a story to tell. They've got funny stories. They've got hair-raising stories. They've got, traumatic stories, sad stories, all of it. But that just comes with the job that we do.
Yeah, I mean, most of the rangers I've met, I feel like nature and wildlife is almost a sacred thing that they're protecting, and Anton, I was actually just listening to some of his messages recently, and I have some voice messages from him. He would just, he always would repeat that he wasn't just protecting this for him and for his children, for his children's children, but for the whole world. Like, he understood that this wasn't just for this small place, this local area. This was something that the entire world could experience and benefit from. And like you said, these rangers all over the world in these poor conditions that are out there doing this work and have similar feelings about the work that they're doing, and treating it like this sacred thing. And they really are doing it for the whole world. So it's pretty special, and we definitely need to come together to bring more support for them, because if you want to protect climate change, biodiversity, all these things that we talk about, it's pretty much starts with the people on the ground. That's the only way we're going to do it. So yeah.
And that's it. We've got to spread that awareness, but then we've got to do something with that awareness as well. So the more of us that are out there that are working to really just, continue that drive for professionalization, and in my lifetime and career, if I can see that change where rangers around the world feel like they're well represented, they're well supported, they have access to more than just clean drinking water, but they've got, a pension plan and support, and, there's no division between class and caste and female and male rangers and all of it. That's just something that we have to work towards, as well as getting a better understanding of the Indigenous communities that act as guardians, the local communities that are putting in the effort to protect and conserve. And with all of it, I think my biggest fear for the conservation world is that with all the rangers that I work with now, you see more and more that are losing those skills in favor of technology and things. They're losing skills like being able to interpret the bush, being able to track, being able to read sign, feeling more and more comfortable in that environment because they are, glued to phones and to this and that, but or just addicted to the internet like everybody. But if we can learn from those who still have 2 feet firmly planted in their natural environment, and give them the opportunity to join us on this quest to professionalize, then I think we'll be able to create the next generation of rangers that will go forward from strength to strength.
Yeah, that's something to think about, because there's all this knowledge that's just been passed down from generations of living in a certain place that is really hard to pass on without going through that experience and growing up in that environment and being raised by people that have been there. It becomes almost like intuition. It's hard to transfer, but trying to somehow keep grounded to that and maybe capture some of that knowledge and somehow fend off the monster that the internet is to some degree, so we don't lose that connection. But some really amazing work you've been doing. It's been awesome chatting with you. Why do you do this work? What keeps you going still? I mean, I feel like we've covered a lot and touched on it here and there, but if you had to sum it up, what drives you to continue this?
It's the people, man. And I mean, as I mentioned, a big fan of The Clash, and the great late Joe Strummer said, without people, you're nothing. And that is true in conservation. I mean, these incredible people that we surround ourselves with, and these networks, and these passionate, whether they're old or young or cynical or optimistic, we have this incredible platform. And I mean, working with rangers on the ground or with directors of large conservation organizations, it's incredible to see all of these people that are working towards common goals. And the more that we can align those goals and really just strive for the best outcomes of the planet, I think that's what gives species like rhino a chance. That's what gives species like elephant a chance, as well as I know Barney told you about, the underfrogs, all of those little species that we know less about and that don't get the same focus in the limelight. But that's what keeps me going. It's those folks that are working towards the conservation and preservation of those species, of our wildlands, of the cultures and traditions of those Indigenous communities that are still living in and around areas that have been gazetted as protected, and so on. There's so much out there, and it's the people that will make the difference.
Do you have any advice for people that are interested in going down this path, getting into conservation, maybe getting connected to what rangers do, that type of work?
I think, from all the podcasts that I've heard, the same response is everybody, do it. Like I said, we can't do it without people. And it's just once you get that foot in the door, just make yourself indispensable and adaptable. Adaptability is what makes a ranger. It's adapting to the climate. It's adapting to their situation. It's adapting to, the species around them, the people that they're interacting with. Without that adaptability, you're not going to make it. And so don't come into conservation, with no degree thinking that you're the best that there is, and don't come in with a degree thinking that you're the best there is, because there's so much to learn and experience. But if you get in on the ground and you can network with people and just show them that you're passionate and committed to it, and then just do whatever needs to be done to move these goals forward, then you'll be fine. You'll make it.
Yeah, great advice.
Don't expect to get rich either.
Yeah. You get paid in other things like beautiful views and amazing people. So you gotta
you get paid in experiences and beers around the campfire.
Exactly. Well, yeah, this has been a pleasure. I don't know if there's any way people can follow the work you're doing, or is there some way they can get more involved with Rewild, or where would you send people?
Yeah, I mean, we've got, in my opinion, biased opinion, we got one of the best comms teams putting out some amazing stuff. So, follow us in the usual places. And yeah, if for those who can, try not to travel to all the different conferences if you don't have to, but for those really important ones, that you can make up for the carbon somewhere else, come out to the World Ranger Congresses, network as you can, and join where you can, whether it's through the SMART partnership and you want to support with that tech side of things, or whether you want to join the International Ranger Federation or join your local ranger organization, then I'm sure our paths will cross somehow. But get involved, keep active, and don't be shy to get your hands in the dirt and help out.
All right. Well, thank you so much, James. This is great. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, John. Anytime. You guys take care.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for listening to the Rhino Man podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you're excited to see the film succeed, please subscribe and review our podcast on Spotify and iTunes. Then follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Rhino Man the Movie. More details about Rhino Man, the social impact campaign, and future screenings are at rhinomanthemovie.org. To learn more about the Global Conservation Corps and their work, visit globalconservationcorps.org. Sign up for the newsletter and follow GCC on all of the social platforms. If you like this podcast, make sure to subscribe and catch up on GCC's Voices of Nature podcast, where Bob Ludke interviews a wide range of people who have dedicated their lives to making a difference in conservation. A special thanks goes out to Simone Wilson for the music for this podcast. He's the brilliant composer for Rhino Man the Movie. Learn more about his work at simonewilsonmusic.com. Until next time, I'm John Jerko, and this is the Rhino Man Podcast.